anyways, good morning, guys. I think we're still expecting quite a few people to come. I think we have around 130, 140 people expected to show up today. Some may or may not make it, I guess, for whatever reason. But thank you guys for coming out for our annual meeting and our club picnic. So we decided to do a few different things this year. So unfortunately, Mike Renner could not come this year. He had some excuse about some bike ride he had to go do this weekend. We'll let him off the hook this time. But we did bring in two really good guest speakers. We have some really good topics to discuss. Our first presenter is James Chew. He has a very long history with the automotive industry. Actually, today he just reminded me this is the first time I'm actually meeting James. So James, actually, you probably read a lot of his car reviews in DB. He's been doing that for quite a number of years. So James, we appreciate all the work that you do for the DB and for the club, so thank you very much for that. I will turn over, did you need the mic or not?
Can you guys hear me? Yeah. Good.
Okay, well, Mike.
All right, well, good morning, everybody. How many of you really enjoyed this drive up to Gaithersburg today? I think the one thing I learned today was that the HOV lanes here in Drive 95, they start their summer switch on May 23rd, so 10 o'clock in the morning, they're all going south. How many of you actually read the description of who I am? Good, all right. So I always like to try to figure out who I'm talking to and give an idea. It gives you a little idea what my background is. So first off, how many of you remember 19-cent a gallon gas? Good. Some of you are as old as me. That's good to hear. How many of you, if I say points, plugs, and condensers, how many knows what I'm talking about? Good. All right. So that gives an idea of what type of people I'm talking to. How many of you still open the hood on your car every time you get gasoline? Oh my God, I'm the only one. Every time I go, about every third time, somebody says, "Excuse me, sir, your hood's open." And I say, "Yeah, I know." Why? Well, because I like to stare at the engine. I mean, but, so that's the other thing. Let's see, another thing. How many of you guys remember when the speed, when we decided to go 55 miles an hour to save gasoline? All right. So what I wanted to talk about today, how many of you actually read my stuff in the DB? How many of you actually read the DB? How many of you prefer the DB over the Roundel? Okay, a couple of people right there. So I've been immersed somehow in the automotive world for over 60 years for a variety of ways. I started off as a little kid, going with my father to the garages. Remember when service stations actually had service bays? Remember when they used to come out and actually put gas in your car and check everything like that? So that's what got me intrigued with there. And, you know, for some reason my father would take me to places and I'd watch him put them up on a rack, and I got involved, got interested in there. Furthermore, because he was an engineer, and we all know engineers are just, you know, notoriously cheap, he was going to work on the car by himself. So that meant he was going to go to a parts store. How many of you remember a parts store where you used to walk in and there was a parts counter right there? There's usually some old guy who's got one lung because he's been chain smoking for his entire life. And nobody knew who he was, but he just sort of hung out there all day, chain smoking and drinking coffee. So he lived on nicotine and caffeine, and you learn car stuff that way. So it's been an intriguing thing. So what I wanted to talk to you about today is when I write for this magazine, I hope you guys have noticed it's just not the typical, what I call the me like car, you know, we drive fast type reviews you get for the buff books nowadays. Unfortunately, you know, when we talk about this in the history of the auto ecosystem, when car enthusiast magazines first started, it literally was journalists who were also car enthusiasts. And so you had some fantastic writing, and they happened to say, what is of interest to people? And then something funny happened, just like the mainstream media, I'm afraid. It started to become opinion. You know, I'm going to tell you what it is. And, you know, I guess the auto industry sort of foresaw this influencer type thing that we see nowadays in social media, because you read the stuff and after about 2 sentences I just put it down and say I can't stand this anymore. So I try to bring something like the business aspect to it because I have worked for Chrysler, I have worked for General Motors, I have been in design studios, I have developed vehicles, I've been on race teams. By the way, you guys notice that race that just happened right there? You guys ever wonder why McLaren suddenly went from a has-been to chasing Red Bull? Because my day job happens to be with a company called Cadence Design Systems. And if you ever take a look at those cars, you can see Cadence on the side of it. Why does that matter? Because something that is funny that's happened with racing, and the old timers hate it, is this introduction to technology. Well, in the day job, my company happens to develop the tools to design electronic systems and also computational fluid dynamics. So the reason why that's important is that usually the best race teams are the ones that can have the most practice time on the track. Because you get out there and you go, all right, let's adjust this, all right, let's adjust that. What's happening now is that, what's happening even in NASCAR, you know, the same place that finally got rid of, first they got rid of leaded gas, which was an amazing thing, and then they got rid of carburetors, so they're probably the only people that actually employ carburetor mechanics. But the technology has gotten into racing, and that really makes the old timers up a tree, because they say you're taking the driver away from it. And it's just like, well, is it the objective to try to win? So, you know, you see this constant battle right there. So anyway, my point about McLaren suddenly getting very good is that they were a very poor team. Most of you probably don't know this, but McLaren was almost out of business a couple of years ago. But by this introduction of technology that allows you to do a lot of testing on computers rather than on the track, well, you just saw how all Lando needed was 2 more laps. He probably would have passed next. So that's the infusion of technology into the automotive world. And so you're always seeing this type of angst that goes in here between the old timers and what's the best realities of the day. So this is who we are. At least I hope that's who we are. And it's absolutely true. I work in Washington, D.C. now, and I cannot believe how much of an anti-car mafia there is. They hate us. They hate the fact that we can drive fast. They hate the fact that every time they tried to kill the car, we figured out a way to get the car even better. I was driving on the HOV lanes today, and because I drive a BMW, I know that means, especially with my top down, well, the car, not me, but you know, I know that makes me an automatic target for the Virginia State Patrol. In fact, I kind of know where they are on HOV lanes. I am constantly stunned how some, you know, jackass in the Toyota Camry is going to pass me whizzing by at 100 miles an hour. And of course, they never get caught, right? But if I go like 82 miles an hour, I'm going to get caught. But the fact of the matter is that it's all about control. The thing that makes the car unique in the US over every other part of the world is that it gives us the freedom. Freedom, and I'll tell you how we managed to get that freedom. But the fact of the matter is that even stuff like, how many of you read my reviews about the BMW electric vehicles? I've only reviewed 8 of them now. It is the ultimate in control. Why? Because you gotta stop. You gotta stop, you gotta recharge. And oh, by the way, you have to you can only recharge in certain areas. So what are they doing when you stop the recharge? They're gathering data on you. So let's be I'm going to talk about that a little bit. So this is I think this is absolutely true. This might be the last wise words that David E. Davis ever wrote, but the fact of the matter is that it is true. Governments detest our cars because they give us way too much freedom on here. So that being said, what I want to talk about today, initially, is sort of the ecosystem, a little bit of the history. So gets us to where we are today. And please feel free to stop me to ask any questions. Keep in mind, if you stop me to ask questions, I am between you and lunch, so keep that in mind. So this is sort of how things started. It really was a hobby. If you look at the beginning of the auto industry, somebody said, hey, you know, it's not that I needed a faster horse. He started experimenting around with internal combustion engines. By the way, you also experimented around, people don't realize this, but you also experimented around with electric motors too, I might add. But it was all this concept of transportation. The funny thing about automobiles and what that earlier statement is that automobiles are the ultimate democratization out there. How many of you have ever been to Europe? And you go into the old part of town, and what do you see up there? You see usually the steeple with the clock, right? Because once upon a time, you had to be rich to know the time. You think about it. And then suddenly this thing, after the wristwatch came out, so suddenly everybody had to know the time, so you could be anywhere to do it. Less control over the people. Same with once upon a time with transportation. You had a horse. If you were rich enough, you could get a train. Well, that's just not good enough because the trains only go to certain spots. Most people couldn't afford a ship. Frankly, we're kind of a landlocked nation, and horses go only so far. So people said, you know, I'm looking to try to create greater freedom. So not only did you have to have the car, you had to have the ecosystem. How many have heard of Standard Oil? All right, Rockefeller. And you talk about a guy who got totally screwed. The government said build an oil ecosystem, and then they said you're too powerful. So it's like, which is just shows you that our federal government has been contradictory since day one. But now you had to create this ecosystem, and it was sort of the Wild West. You know, I'm going to make a car. I'm going to sell a car. And oh, by the way, I'm going to do my books in my head, and I'm going to count the money, and I'm going to put the money under my mattress. And that's why you should read this book called My Years at General Motors, because that's when Alfred Sloan turned a hobby into a business. And what's very interesting is you read that book, and he does a fantastic job. In fact, it's required reading at General Motors. And when you read it, and you think about the required reading at General Motors, it tells you why Chew's failing. Because out of a 400-page book, guess how many pages are devoted to product? 2. That's a problem. And they find this out all the time. So we went to here, and then suddenly, as you guys know, we're in this depression. Now suddenly the industrial might of the United States was tested in World War II. And we went from butters to guns. We went from factory workers who used to be the men to suddenly the women that were doing the factory workers. We had the mechanics out there on the front line that said, we have to get this thing out. Oh, there's an obstacle. I don't have time to wait for the engineers to figure it out. I got to get to it now. And then toward the end, and you can kind of tell toward the end, people were trying to figure out, how can I make money after this? Now you think about that. How many of you actually gone out to the Peterson Automotive Museum in California? You ought to take a look at it because you see some of the race cars there were drop tanks from World War II bombers. Everybody was now suddenly trying to go better, faster. And what can you do for the ultimate freedom? It was the ultimate hot rod way of doing things. Can I be faster than you? What can I do? Well, when you want to make money, now suddenly they says, well, okay, we've got this business thing going on here. Why don't we try to figure out how to really make money? And suddenly we were at this idea of what I call American prosperity, American optimism. We beat the world. We literally beat the world. 2 fronts, nobody ever thought it could happen. So, and suddenly they were looking at us saying, you got to be the world leaders. Well, then we had this thing called Detroit coming out. And then you had this thing called a car for every purpose, person purpose. Now that was good, that was interesting, but the most interesting that happened was when Eisenhower, who as you guys know was the Supreme Commander of Europe, and he was the President of the United States, said, you know what really limited me in Europe was a lack of roads if I was going to fight. And I've really got to figure out a way how to protect this country, so I'm going to build this interstate system within the U.S. And if you think about it, it really is, guys that probably don't know this, it's really a defense system. At time of war, we are to get off those roads because that's what's going to be used for transportation of the armed forces. But as you can tell, it also did commerce. Well, if you've got roads that can go anywhere, what else do you need? You need service stations, right? You need motels. You need restaurants. And that's when we sort of built up this economy. How many of you guys have heard still, I don't want to date anybody here, but you know, Chevrolet used to have an ad called See the USA in your Chevrolet. Because suddenly what would happen is that the baby booms came of age and says, if I want to just drive someplace, I can go drive and do it. Remember that whole control thing again about the freedom? And then, the dreaded family vacation, how do you remember stuck in the back of the station wagon because, well, you were bad, and, going and driving to God knows where, because let's face it, this is the time of year, this is what you did. That's kind of what started this wanderlust about the U.S. You literally could get in your car and drive anywhere in the 48 continuous states. And that was something that was just mind-blowing. I mean, so if you go talk to Europeans today, when they come over here for their month-long vacation in the summer, what do? They rent an RV on one side of the country, and they drive it to the other side, because they can't believe you can do that. It's even more mind-boggling to me, being a Southern California native. I didn't realize this until I moved out here to Washington, D.C., and if I used to drive, and for those of you who actually do read my reviews, I know most of you don't because I don't hear too many complaints, but if I go from LA to San Francisco and I put that same distance on the East Coast, how many states have I gone through? About 7, okay? And the nice thing about it is that I still don't have to pay a toll going from California, but I think that might be coming next. Now what happened though is that if everybody's making money, you get egos. And people started turning this business into their own personal hobby. And one really was NASCAR racing, where it literally used to be win on Sunday, sell on Monday. The Monday morning staff meetings at the big 3, big 4 if you count AMC, literally would be who won and what can I do that makes sure that I win next week. And so all the engineers would be devoted on what they could do. If you're a Chrysler or Plymouth, what can we do to make sure Richard Petty wins next week? I mean, it literally was like that was kind of the thing. So it was kind of the Wild West hustle, and it was reflected in our advertising. How many of you guys remember this ad? I mean, if you were a baby boomer, if you were young like me, you saw this ad, you just wanted one of those stuff. That was just absolutely cool. I mean, that was fantastic. You took a look at the advertising that happened then. That was something else that came out. We weren't talking safety. No. We weren't talking fuel economy. We were talking what looks cool. Or if you're a guy, what gets the babes, right? I mean, it literally is with that type of thing. And I do still use, by the way, this is for my personal collection to give, so this is proof I'm an engineer because I'm a half rack. But the fact is that that's what the type of advertising used to be. And so we were balls to the walls, what can we do to get 0 to 60 even faster? The first thing you did is that you bought a car, you bought a car new, what did you do? You took off the wheels and you put on mad wheels, right? You took off the carburetor, you went over to the speed shop, you put on a metal rock manifold, put a bigger carburetor because you wanted to go faster. That was what was in it. And then something funny happened in the early 70s. The gas crisis. Remember I talked about 19-cent a gallon gas, and you went there was a gas station on every corner, and then we had gas wars, right? Which I still don't understand what that meant, but it's because all 4 gas stations had the same price, but okay. But the fact is that now you suddenly went from 19 cents a gallon to 50 cents to 30 cents a gallon. And oh, by the way, we weren't getting enough oil. You guys remember that? And then I don't know if it was just unique to California. We had odd or even days. How many of you guys remember gasoline stations that have flags on their gas stations to say whether or not they had gas? And then these poor guys who used to jump and they'd be selling lemonade or whatever. Now there was a lot of confusion. And of course, the government does what it's supposed to do. I guess we're supposed to do something. They always do it wrong. We're going to make 55 gallon. We're going to make sure that we can go no faster than 55 miles an hour. We're going to make daylight savings time year round. All this other type of stuff. But the thing that really got to the American auto industry was the introduction of imports. Why was that bad for the American auto industry? Remember that earlier chart, every car for every person purpose? Guess what the other thing was? They're going to buy what we make. It doesn't matter how crappy the product is, how poorly designed it is, how difficult it is to work. How many of you, and I'm just saying this because I'm a Chrysler guy, how many of you ever worked on a Chrysler 383 V8? Guess where the spark plugs are, for those of you who remember, guess how the spark plugs are on a Chrysler 383 V8? They're underneath the exhaust manifold, point is always down. How much fun is that to work on? It's not. Now you're sitting there seeing these things called Toyotas and Hondas and Datsuns. And there's a couple of funny things that happen. First off, they never break. Holy cow, they never break. And secondly, if I gotta work on it, they're easy to work on. And that's something funny, that's the thing that's kind of happened, is that if the government's gonna get involved, you know there's gonna be regulation, right? That was the excuse. Okay, unsafe at any speed. Oh, by the way, cars emit too much emission, which is true. It still boggles my mind that we used to have leaded gasoline and thought it was fine. And if you guys recall any of the, so we're gonna do unleaded, we're gonna do account converters. And then we gotta make them safe. How many of you know when safe seatbelts became mandatory in US cars? 1966. Now, if you have one, I'm sure all of you do have the internet, but Google the safety belt public service announcements. And it's astounding. And you heard the excuses. I can brace myself. It ruins my clothing. These were things that were real. So there was an education process there. How many of you remember going to take a driver's education and watching those movies where your local highway patrol or state trooper would be hauling bloody bodies out everywhere, right? Everybody. You know why they stopped showing them to my generation? Because that was also when the Gory movies came out. We thought that was kind of cool. But so the fact is we stopped doing it. And then the emissions. And now you've got this, you've got fuel economy, you got safety, you got emissions, you got diamond lanes, and then suddenly the insurance companies started saying, you know, we're really tired of paying for people who are going to buy a Chrysler, these large V8s and these mangled bodies and these mangled cars where we're going to do insurance rates. So suddenly, our auto industry did not know where to go. How many of you guys heard of this diamond lane stuff? That was in California, but you guys call them carpool lanes here, HOV lanes. That was another government control. Well, we're not going to build we're not going to make the freeways any bigger because we don't have room. We're going to make sure that if you want this special lane, you got to have more than one person. So again, things started to change. Your freedom started getting taken away. But what we really learned was that all that short-term thinking that was going on in Detroit, they finally caught up to it. This guy didn't even exist until the imports came around. Remember JD Power? Customer Satisfaction Index. Nobody even knew what that was. But if it was a high score, that had to be pretty good. But anecdotally, everybody who owned an import was noticing that you never take it back to the shop. Okay, and it didn't matter, like when I used to consult for Chrysler, when somebody said, well, we're going to prove to the market that we're higher quality because we're going to have the best warranty in the business. And that's when you saw how insular Detroit was, because I asked the simple question, how many of you have ever taken your car to a dealership for service? Nobody. Why? Because they're executives. If there's something wrong with their car, they drive it to work, and somebody takes their car out of the executive parking lot, and they fix it, and they come back. They have no idea how much fun it was to go to a dealer. They had no idea. They didn't even know what it was like to go car shopping. Why? They got a free car every 6 months. Check the box, here you go. They had no clue. And then you had this Deming guy. How many of you guys heard of this Deming guy? Okay, he's a little bit of a crackpot, but he was around a lot of stuff in terms of, hey, you gotta, at the time, there still is, there's some animosity between everybody in the car business and labor. And who else would know whether a car was well built other than the people that were on the assembly line? However, those people with cars on the assembly line were told, get those cars out, we don't care, because people are gonna buy them. And that's what they did. And then how many have heard of this ad? Get your hands on the Toyota and you'll never let go. That was incredibly true in California. Everybody who bought a Toyota, their second car was a Toyota. Their third car was a Toyota. Why? Great gas mileage. How many remember, here's something, standard AM/FM radio. Okay? Bucket seats. Well, for young people like me, we certainly who learned how to drive on our Paris station wagon with a front bench seat, bucket seats sounded pretty good, right? And they were sporty, good fuel economy. And then something happened that really turned the enthusiasts to BMWs. How do you guys remember this thing? 2-year hymnals from 2002. And what I loved about that, when David E. Davis could still write coherently, was he actually said something that, remember how I said earlier, a car for every person purpose, but never said make it fun to drive? You know, there's this, I think it was Whitman who read, most men live lives of quiet desperation. And I've used this in a couple of my reviews. Most people drive cars out of quiet desperation. Nobody really wants to drive a minivan. Nobody really wants to drive a camcorder. Nobody even wants to buy one of those crossover SUVs. You buy BMWs because they're fun to drive. Even if you're in traffic, it's fun to drive. And so he actually talked about that, about how these people with quiet desperation are watching them drive this. And then here's something else that happened. You know, something that was Detroit decided to do the quality thing. So guess how Detroit decided to address quality? How many of you have ever been to a car assembly line, car factory? So what did they do? They put more quality inspectors in there. Wow, that was good. Or if you're General Motors, you went from people to robots. And they couldn't figure out why. They just build crappy cars faster. I mean, this goes, all right, something's going on right here. But you got this guy. Now, if you guys have you ever been to Torrance, California? Go to Torrance, California, there's a headquarters of Honda Motor USA. And you go to Honda Motor USA, in the lobby is the Honda Museum, it's free of charge. And it's really fascinating because it has all the Honda products that came to the US, including the generators, including the lawn mowers. It's fascinating. But this was interesting what he said. Always make your products customer friendly. When you're making something, think about the person who'll be to spend the most time with it. Is it any wonder that the Honda Accord was the best-selling car in this country for a long time? Because it followed that type of philosophy. Remember that versus they'll build whatever they will buy whatever we build? That was a huge day of reckoning. And I have to tell you, that really was a day of reckoning that caught the automakers by surprise, the big three or the big four by surprise. Here's the other thing caught them by surprise, this thing. Remember the 2002, that wasn't all that practical, but man, you got that thing. Now look at how visually that, if you guys are into advertising, most of you probably don't have a boring life like me, but I do read these things. You look at the BMW print ads during what I call the Renaissance, when they finally, with the reawakening, when they said, we are not going to be a poor man's Mercedes. We're going to be the ultimate driving machine. And the advertising reflected that. Who put out an ad like that? And there's a real fascinating one. Unfortunately, I don't have Wi-Fi here, but I'll show you. There was a really great TV ad showing one of these things where you showed a BMW 3 Series being driven on a trail, and you saw a guy washing his car and get it back on there. And it said the only time a BMW is off the road is when the driver stops to get the road off the BMW. I find that ad fascinating for a couple of reasons. First off, I don't know how many people drive a car on a trail nowadays. And furthermore, how many still wash their own cars? Okay, good. So maybe it's still relatable nowadays. But that was really fascinating. Now, why is that fascinating right there? Because that showed you what the American consumer wanted nowadays. They didn't want these Novocaine power steering. How many of you guys remember driving like your parents' station wagon? And you had power steering, couldn't feel a thing. And you had power brakes, if you touched it, the whole car would shudder and everybody would go move forward. And you know why? During a muscle car, it was 0 to 60 times? Because you couldn't turn those cars. Now suddenly you can do that. That was just wild to the automakers. So where do we go from there? Well, now it's just like, well, I guess it's no longer instinct. I guess we have to really be a business, ironic again, and figure out what the customer really wants. Somehow, the Japanese and the Germans took our market. What can we do to get back in it? And by the way, during the recovery, now you started seeing something that was interesting in the automakers. With the exception of Chrysler, you started seeing how everybody in the management ranks had MBAs. Now, there's nothing wrong with MBAs. Okay, everybody, you want to get one, it's your business. But keep in mind, an MBA does not teach you anything about the business that you're in and how to be successful. All an MBA does is say, well, there's all this other stuff. finance, I'll get everything in order, how to calculate return on investment. What they're really looking at is now suddenly, because he had all these MBAs, says, what business are we in? How many of you guys heard a guy named Rick Wagner, who was a former chairman of GM? Do you know what Rick Wagner's ultimate recovery for GM was going to be? He was going to stop being in the auto business and turn all the dealerships into retail. Why? Developing a car is expensive. And the return, relatively speaking, is low. But banks were making money because it was just services. Retail was making money because all they had to do is say, who has the best car out there? Right, that's what we do. If you guys ever study Walmart or Costco, you notice that they give everybody who's making a product wants to get in there because if it's good, they keep buying from you. If it's bad, they shove it out. And that's what suddenly automakers are trying to do. Is how can we maximize our revenue and profits? Then they were trying to say, well, you guys remember once upon a time when people buy a car? I still remember this. I was an undergraduate at Cal Poly Pomona. There was a Ford dealer, and of course I was driving an incredibly unreliable car. I was at the Pep Boys all the time, and so there was a Ford dealer that was across the street from this Pep Boys, and I could never understand why they had all these floor mats. You know why? Because they buy it from the Ford dealer and drive right across the street of the Pep Boys to buy the floor mats. And somebody, his MBA, said, we should do floor mats. How many of you guys remember going to a car stereo shop to get a new stereo? Who does that now? Nobody. And then somehow Chrysler broke out, and it was real, and I do mean despite Iacocca. He did some nice things, but you know, read the story about the Lamborghini Imperial someday. He was kind of starting to get out of it, and the Chrysler Maserati PC. But somehow that infrastructure that he built succeeded without him, despite him. And you know why? Because they brought in a guy by the name of Francois Castaigne. Now, why is that important? Well, one reason why Chrysler wanted to buy AMC for two reasons. First off, AMC had this thing called Jeep. And God love it, people bought it. And what they were finding is that if people had a Jeep, guess what was their second car? A Mercedes. Wow, that's kind of interesting. Wonder how we get into that kind of business. But the other thing is that how could AMC keep churning out these great products? What was the Jeep Cherokee but the forebearer of today's SUVs? How were they able to do it while the big three couldn't? They had this chief engineer named Francois Castaigne. Among other things, Francois was the chief engineer, was for Renault's Formula One team. You just saw a race. What's the racing mentality? It doesn't matter how good you say you are. If you're not that starter grid, who cares? So he came up with this concept called platform teams. And that's when you started to see how Chrysler started breaking out. And they were the most profitable car company in the world for the longest time until Mercedes bought them. But the fact of the matter is that Europe and Japan stayed focused and they started driving the US market. When it used to go into Chrysler Design Studio and used to see something from Ford or GM there, that was no longer the case. You were starting to see BMWs in there. You're seeing Hondas in there. In fact, when Chrysler reinvented themselves, this is a true story, they first said, we got to study Toyota. Toyota said no. Apparently, that's all Mr. Honda had to hear to allow Chrysler to study Honda. Now, why is that? Remember, you just saw a different Honda. Honda was a brilliant engineer, but he didn't have a degree. So Toyota said, you're always going to be on the floor right there because you don't have a degree. So he started his own car company. So that's where Chrysler got their product development, was from Honda and all the targets they had there. So this is sort of where we are nowadays. So now you got this, well, are we a commodity? Are we a fashion statement? Are we innovation? Are we a necessary evil? And anybody says they know where this industry is going, they're lying. Okay? They don't know. I can't tell you that in automotive history, the streets of American automotive history are littered with sure things, and they're going to sell. They never do. How many of you have read the story about the BMW, the first BMW M3? I just saw one out there, nice car, by the way. That first BMW M3, you read the car and driver reviews, oh my God, they'll have no problem getting rid of the 2400, some of the 2400 in the US. Except one thing. They were the same price as a Porsche 944. And we all know what type, how many of you remember the 80s and the type of people that drove Porsche 944s? Okay, they were going to be driving M3s. Okay, and you guys remember what the interest rate for a car loan was back then? It was double digit. So I'm going to pay, so here's this yuppie who's buying a car to impress chicks, and he's going to say, well, I'm not going to pay $8,000 more. They had a hard time selling those 2400. That's why we almost didn't get any more M3s in the US. So it's just like, well, what are we going to do right here? So think about this. The big two have given up. You can't buy, even Craig, you can't buy a car from these guys nowadays. Chevrolet, GM just said we're not going to make Malibus anymore. They have given up the segment. And now you got this free market versus overregulation. The dumbest thing the government can do is say, and by the way, they've done it well. I shouldn't say the dumbest thing, but every time I say the dumbest, they always astound me. But we're going to go EVs, right? Yeah. No, you're not. Guess what's going to happen this summer in California? Because it happened the previous two, but we never reported. During the summer, EV owners are going to be told, please don't charge your EVs because we got brownout condition because everybody's got their air conditioner wrong. Because no one's addressing the one thing you need for electricity, for EVs, right? A reliable grid. Nobody's got that. So there. Now, the other thing you guys have to really look out for is this data privacy thing. I'm going to talk about this a little bit. Because whatever you do, they're selling that data. And you have no idea where they're selling it for. And I'm looking forward to some class action. So that's my view of the ecosystems. Before we go back into look at a little bit of the business, anybody have any questions?
Yeah, where does BMW fit into all this?
In the auto industry?
Yes.
Okay, well, a lot of what they've done is that when BMW decided, and this is Bob Lutz, BMW was on a dying curve. They were always going to be known as perennially the poor man's Mercedes. And in fact, when Lutz was there was this party called the Green Party of Germany, where we got to hug trees and get fuel economy and stuff like that. Lutz said, nobody wants to buy a boring car. He was when he came up with BMWs are the ultimate driving machine. They were born racing. BMW continues to drive this market in terms of affordable. I'll let you decide what affordable means nowadays, but affordable performance. Everybody still wants to see what the new 3 Series looks like. Everybody wants to know what's the motorsport thing going to look like. How BMW fits into this, and they drove the enthusiast market. They started unleashing what I would call I said earlier today how most people drive cars out of quiet desperation. Hopefully nobody drives a BMW out of quiet desperation. Hopefully you guys want to afford to drive in your cars. And everybody tries to capture that magic. To the point that sometimes people even try to copy the Hofmeister kink in their vehicles, which is very interesting. And you notice that, when they say on the X vehicles, they're the BMWs of the SUV markets. Everybody wants their car to drive just like that. And I'm going to tell you, that new X3 is coming out. That's going to be something that's going to really astound a lot of people. It won't be a crossover SUV. It's going to be a pretty interesting vehicle with the driving dynamics of what you expect out of the 3 Series.
How do you think BMW has managed to stay independent for so long, as far as, they own Rolls-Royce, right? There's no other subsidiary of BMW. They've kind of managed to kind of stay independent for so long. I mean, like Volkswagen owns pretty much everything.
BMW managed to stay independent because they made smart decisions. One of the smartest decisions, something that when you develop a vehicle, it's all based on something called a chassis. And if you look at the history of automotive companies, they have different chassis for different sizes, for different things. Years ago, BMW came up with what we call a modular chassis. They said, you know what, we have no idea where this market's going to go, gas, hybrid, EV. All we know is that we can't have 3 separate chassis. So they have a modular chassis one for large car, one for small car. Now there's one new one called the Neue class, which will be interesting to see where it goes. Where it doesn't matter whether it's gas, hybrid, EV, all-wheel drive, front-wheel drive, rear-wheel drive, it's the same chassis. At that point, it becomes, that's where you get your advantages of scale. And once you do that, now you've driven your cost down to the point that, hey, you can remain independent. So that's where they're at right now. That's how they've been able to do that.
I guess that's why they won't build dedicated platforms
No.
for certain cars.
They build they will build a dedicated platform, a dedicated, like a product like the XM, but it's based on the modular chassis that they have. They won't just build, hey, we got this special car, we're gonna build a special chassis. You just you can't make a business case out of it. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Great. Anything else before we move on before you guys go to lunch? I mean, I can stop now if you want, but if you want me to run through this other thing, I'll be happy to do it. You guys would like me to move on a little more? Okay, great. So, this is the ecosystem. And let me talk about, I'm going to break it down for you as to how this functions. So first you got the OEM. Every OEM needs a leader. And you can tell when a car company has a good leader or a bad leader by the product they have going on out there. But you have to have a leader and everybody else sucks up to that. I mean, everybody else follows that leader. How many of you watch a movie, Ford v Ferrari? Remember that scene where Henry Ford's out there and his entire staff is in the office? They're not kidding. It's the leader and all these executive suck-ups. But they're going to do it. And then you have this thing called labor. The funny thing about this is that while the leader says go do this, these guys aren't going to follow, but they're always in conflict with each other. The designer will design something that the engineer can't build. Okay? And the engineer is going to design something that's going to engineer something that labor can't build reliably. And then you got this accountant that says at the end of the day I got to make money. And they're all, and oh by the way, you got labor that says, and this is I'm not kidding. How can I maximize the number of employees to build that car? Which is exactly contradictory to what you're supposed to do, which is to get more efficient. So you've got this battle going on here with the OEM. So after you got this battle going on, then you have the dealer. Now why is that interesting? How many of you know, who do you think is the ultimate customer of the OEM? You or the dealer? The dealer. The OEM, with the exception of Tesla, the OEM sells to the dealer, who is an independent businessman. And that person's supposed to make money too. And they don't want a dog product that stays on firm. Remember I told you about those 2,400 M3s that for sure we're going to sell? Well, when the dealer buys a car, they take out a loan also. And if it's sitting on that floor, he ain't happy. He or she ain't happy. So you got to deal with the dealer too. So you got to train them too. Well, you got this. Now on top of all of that, you got the regulator. The regulator plays all sorts of. They have no idea what it does to the auto industry or to the dealer. But the reason why we have regulators is that left on themselves, we'd be driving dangerous cars, and you guys would be, you'd be driving dangerous cars. We could be lemons. Let's face the facts. That's why we have these laws. It's proven, okay? You leave these people alone, they're going to take advantage of you. Plain and simple. So then, on top of all of that, you've got this aftermarket. Now this is, how many of you have been to the Specialty Equipment Manufacturer Association, the SEMA show in Las Vegas? You guys should go there someday on the public days. Because these guys actually help drive the market by saying, hey, I will let you customize my car. I will let you tune my car. And usually with every new platform, the savvy OEM puts out the design data for the aftermarket. So they help out too. I just noticed how many people, there's a good number of out there that have aftermarket wheels, pretty good looking wheels out there too. The fact is that they end up being part of the ecosystem that you can't ignore. And just take a look at a Roundel or DB and see how many aftermarket we have. The ads right there. Well, now you got this other thing called the energy provider. It's even more important now because of of electric vehicles. But the fact is that you got to have gasoline somewhere. Hopefully you got reliable gas, but you got to have it somewhere in there. So you got all this stuff that goes on within the ecosystem. They do have to play because these guys have to make money also. They're a business too. Now, what comes out of that is the dreaded influencer. Now, why do I say the dreaded influencer? Well, once upon a time, when the U.S. auto industry was growing at the same time it was growing, it was natural that somebody's going to write a review about cars. And remember I told you about how it went from journalists who wrote about cars to suddenly people whose egos were, I drive the car market? Something funny happened. You guys notice something funny happened when the U.S. auto market almost collapsed? They stopped supporting the influencer. And guess what happened? Nobody noticed. So now, you don't have a lot of print magazines anymore because it's expensive. And you've got all these, what's happened is that this influencer has now, while you still have some incredible ones out there, car drivers still have some legacy people that are really good, really attractive to some extent. Now you have the web-based guys. And the web-based guys are just, I mean, read them for entertainment, but don't believe a thing about it. Because the web-based guys figure they're going to be like social media people that says, you know what, I'm going to write bad things about your car until you hire me as a consultant. And that's their shtick right there. So you've got all this. Now, you know, the bottom line is that you're there. You've got to decide how you're going to play all this. No one, the beauty about the car market is nobody can tell you what car to buy. Why? It's your money. One of the dumbest things influencers would do would say, boy, whoever buys this car is a numbnut. And that was a lot of the reviews right there. You never insult, and this was a hard lesson some people still haven't learned. Never insult somebody when they're spending their own money. Because why? It's their own money. You have no idea what's going on behind somebody. And that was one of the worst reviews, and I still see it sometimes with Ron Bell and even to some extent some of our magazines that I respect. But don't insult people. They bought that car for a reason. It's your choice. So that's something to keep in mind. And this is what I kind of want to end with when I get to the next slide is that the reason what makes BMW unique is the fact you guys can get people like Mike Brenner to talk to you here. It is the fact that you've got Tom Plazinski, who, by the way, was the guy who saved the next generation M3 when he was at BMW in Canada. He managed to get M3s, E36 M3s over there, which eventually showed that there was a market for it in the US. BMW actually listens to you. Now, I will say, don't write, when you write something to them, and it's up to your mind, I can tell you that somebody says, if you buy this, I swear my friends and I will all buy it, so you ought to do it. Okay, don't do that. Okay. It's amusing, if it makes you feel good, fine. But they do listen. I have exercised that BMW ecosystem. I wrote an article about how I had a 2007 X5. And at 90,000 miles, the differential went out. I think we could all agree that's unusual. I called up BMW and said, you know, I got this issue. They looked at it and said, yeah, Mr. Chew, we've noticed you've owned nothing but BMWs for the past 20 years. I think we can help you out. So this is what makes BMW unique. You guys this is the biggest single mark car club out there. I don't care what Porsche says, but it's us. Obviously one of the most active ones out there. And probably more important is that they do listen and they do take this market seriously. How many have been to Spartanburg to see the X5 assembly plant? And just for chuckles, they've done the ultimate driving experiences, whatever is in town. That's good. How many of you know there's a BMW Tech Center in Sunnyvale, California? It's out there. They're monitoring what they're looking at, what we're trying to do. The presence here is huge. So with that, I hope that, I hope I follow what Richard Feynman said about when you give a talk, know what you're going to say, more or less how you're going to say it. And I hope it's been educational for the past few minutes right there. I know I'm right at noon. Amazing how that works out in there. But I'm glad I try to address any questions any of you might have at this time.
What do you drive?
What do I drive? I drive a 2020 M40i Convertible. Why? Because I have kids in college that I can't afford to have you. That one's expensive enough to live in there. Okay, now, thank you so very much for your time. I hope you read, how many of you know how many articles that I had in this month's DB? Do you guys read the DB? Okay, well, I certainly hope you guys enjoy it. It's been lots of fun. I've got to leave here in about 15, 20 minutes, but I'll stick around for you guys who are shy and want to ask me any more questions. But thank you very much.